By 1993, Psygnosis had established themselves at the forefront of the British video game industry, and as a result would be acquired by Sony, officially announcing the deal on May 21st of the same year. This deal, to be clear, is not what we would consider a conventional acquisition. These days, when we think about acquisitions, Psygnosis would be required to drop everything that they were working on and focus on exclusivity on games specifically for Sony's game console. The thing is, in 1993, Sony had no real presence in the video game industry. No such hardware existed, at least publicly. The PlayStation was still 1 year away from launch, and the deal with Nintendo had already or was about to fall through. Sony needed some strong support of companies at the forefront of technical excellence. While it may seem odd to think about for the PlayStation, Sony needed Psygnosis far more than Psygnosis needed Sony. The PlayStation would be a push into a 32-bit era that utilized CD-ROM technology. To be clear, this wasn't just based on their output of quality titles on the Amiga. By the 90s, Psygnosis were also developing games for the Sega Master System and Sega Mega Drive. Shadow of the Beast 1 came to both the Master System and Mega Drive, while Beast 2 and The Killing Game Show, renamed as Fatal Rewind, saw ports on the Mega Drive. Rather than spend the tens of thousands of dollars on expensive development hardware, Psygnosis would make their own, known as PsyQ, initially for the Genesis and Mega Drive, but later for the Super NES, Sega Game Gear, 32X, and even the Sega Saturn. PsyQ would become the official Sony SDK that game developers used to create their games on the Sony PlayStation 1, which, as we know, Psygnosis already had years of experience with. Psygnosis would proudly announce this on the PsyQ brochure. PsyQ tools have become so widely regarded the world over that they have now been adopted by Sony as the official development tool for the Sony PlayStation. This acquisition was an important one, but on the surface at least initially, it was business as usual. And the games kept coming. In fact, as far as the Amiga is concerned, 1993 would be one of their best in terms of quality. Often criticized for prioritizing graphics over gameplay, Psygnosis rewrote the script, and it would be developer DMA Design who brought 3 incredible games to the Amiga that year: Hired Guns, Walker, and the sequel to Lemmings, Lemmings 2: The Tribes. Hired Guns is a sci-fi action RPG set in the year 2712 on the planet Graveyard. You control a squad of 4 mercenaries with different specialties and different unique characteristics on a mission to rescue hostages, which turns out to be a trap leading to battles against genetically engineered mutants and biohorrors. In the gameplay, it features real-time grid-based first-person exploration in large puzzle-filled levels with push panels, force fields, lifts, and destructible walls. The combat involves a huge arsenal of miniguns, flamethrowers, cannons, grenades, proximity mines, auto-sentry guns, and many others. While the Nintendo 64 revolutionized 4-player split screen, Hired Guns did it first, featuring quad split screen support for up to 4 players on one machine, which was revolutionary for the time. The original Amiga version is best with atmospheric music by Brian Johnson, brother of Scott Johnson, and detailed pseudo 3D graphics run smoothly even on a stock Amiga 500. It came on 5 floppy disks and took advantage of expanded memory on the Amiga. The game would be universally praised thanks to its innovation and multiplayer, and to this day fans remember it well as a cult classic with its atmosphere and replayability. Walker was a game that took years of development time, not because of anything in particular, but because its original iteration would become Lemmings. DMA Design would finally release the game in 1993, and it's a good one. In Walker, you control a mech-style robot that's been sent back in time to alter history by eliminating enemy forces from 4 separate eras: Berlin in World War II, a modern, at least for the time, Middle East conflict, Judgment Day in Los Angeles in 2019, and a future war sometime in 2420. The game smooth scrolls with parallax as endless waves of soldiers, tanks, helicopters, and vehicles are all trying to take you out. And it's a great action game with detailed sprite animations. The connection here to Lemmings is obvious. The controls are very simple but also quite innovative, with 2-player co-op mode, where one player aims and fires with the mouse while the other can move and control the walker with the joystick or keyboard. Solo players can handle both at the same time, which does add some challenge. With more Amiga chip memory, it adds more sound effects and sampled music and audio to the game. While it's mindless fun with a nonsensical plot and brutal difficulty, the gameplay stays with you, and it's a very memorable experience on the Amiga, and one of the best games for 1993. After the massive success of Lemmings, Lemmings 2: The Tribes wouldn't reach the same heights as the original, but it's still a damn good game. Technically, it's even more impressive. The gameplay builds on the original game with classic Lemmings to pick from, but the new Tribe Lemmings include pole vaulters, skaters, Lemmings with jetpacks, runners, and so much more. With 120 new levels and all new music and animations, this is a fantastic game. Sadly gone, however, is the 2-player split-screen innovation of the original, but still, Lemmings 2: The Tribes is an excellent sequel, and it scored well in the magazines. Just like the original game, it saw many different ports to many different platforms. (1993) would also see Traveller's Tale's second game, a puzzle platformer called Pugsy. In Pugsy, you control the main character of the same name, an orange alien that's landed on an unknown planet, when his spaceship is stolen by raccoon natives. The gameplay is a cross of platforming and puzzle elements. In some levels, Pugsy must pick up items to either carry them to specific locations, for example a key to open a chest, or by stacking barrels to jump up and reach high platforms. What's unique about Pugsy is that all the objects react in a realistic manner with a physics system developed for the game. Items have weight, react to gravity and slopes. They can be thrown, stacked, and even scatter. It has 57 unique levels in the game, and it's a fun game in its own right. Pugsy would release initially on the Sega Mega Drive and Amiga in October of 1993 in Europe, with a Mega CD version and North American release in early 1994. Raising Hell Software, who would later become Bizarre Creations, released Wiz and Liz, their second title after the Killing Game Show. The objective is pretty simple. In each stage, you must run and grab the letters from each of the rabbits you collect. Each letter spells out a word on the screen. Once the word is complete, you then rescue the remaining rabbits, which can drop fruit, stars, and clocks. You then return to home base with the collected fruit and mix them into a cauldron for power-ups, extra time, mini-games, and some fun surprises, all while under a strict time limit. The game is incredibly fast, smooth scrolling that requires constant jumping and timing. The spellcrafting system in the game has up to 200 individual spell combinations for varied effects. As this is a Psygnosis game, it has a cameo by none other than Pugsy within the game. Interestingly enough, within Pugsy, a level called Wabbit's World is a nod to Wiz and Liz. Psygnosis were always pushing their brand. (1994) was a transitional year with a few interesting developments. First, Commodore declared bankruptcy in April of the same year, which signaled the death of the aging Amiga. The Amiga 1200, with its AGA or Advanced Graphic Architecture, would not be enough to save the company from its demise. Psygnosis fortunately did not bet the farm on the Amiga. By now, they had well and truly moved their focus to the PC and 16-bit game consoles, and of course the up-and-coming PlayStation, to not only ramp up their efforts to provide Sony with development kits for the PlayStation, but also researching and development of the next generation of games. The Amiga was no longer the lead platform, with the consoles taking the reins. But the Amiga was not quite finished, with some exclusives released that year, including Benefactor, a strategy platform puzzle game with the developer being none other than Digital Illusions Computer Entertainment, or DICE. Originally demo coders, Digital Illusions became well known for the Pinball Dreams games, with fast-scrolling pinball action incredible ball physics, and a best-in-class soundtrack. And of course, DICE went on to much bigger things. But Benefactor is a fantastic and underrated game that has the digital illusions DNA that's found in their earlier games. After Shadow of the Beast 3, Reflections worked on one more Amiga game, Brian the Lion, a cutesy platforming game that is much more colourful than Beast, but not a particularly fun game to play. It is, however, full of the same technical wizardry that Reflections could only seem to extract out of the Amiga. The many parallax layers scroll at silky smooth frame rates, the Mode 7 style Castlevania tunnel sequence, even the introduction logo is displayed in real time. It's almost as if Reflections said, anything that the Super Nintendo can do, the Amiga can as well. Technically, Brian the Lion is up there with Beast, but ultimately, it's a mediocre platformer that's not super fun to play. DMA Design had a multi-game contract with Psygnosis going all the way back to the days of Blood Money, and they would finish it up with All New World of Lemmings in 1994, which would be the third mainline game in the Lemmings series. This would be DMA Design's last ever game for Psygnosis. All New World of Lemmings represents Lemmings with larger graphics than the previous games, and introduced enemies and an alternative way to giving Lemmings skills. With 90 levels, the formula was feeling a bit stale by now, and the larger Lemming character sizes was considered a misstep. Mike Daly, programmer of the Lemmings games, called it a bit crap, more to end our commitment to Psygnosis than to actually do a good game. The larger character sizes really spoiled it. By the end of Lemmings 3, I think we were all ready to move on. David Jones, the head of DMA Design, said, "We needed a break for a while after Lemmings. 3 years of hell. DMA would bid Psygnosis, Lemmings and the Amiga farewell. But now that Lemmings was a household name, DMA's stock had risen significantly. They would sign a 2-game contract worth several $1,000,000 with Nintendo. Their next game, Uni Rally, also known as Uni Racers, would release on the Super Nintendo. Unfortunately for DMA, however, they were sued by Pixar, with the claim being that the animation of the Uni Racers cycles was copied frame by frame from Red's Dream. Pixar won, and Nintendo would be forced to stop selling the game with only 300,000 cartridges ever produced. Their second title, Body Harvest, was originally a launch title for the Nintendo 64. But development was slow, and the game faced numerous delays. As such, it missed its intended launch. Nintendo would drop Body Harvest, but it was picked up by Gremlin Interactive, who would go on to acquire DMA Design. While Body Harvest is considered one of the better N64 titles, it underperformed. Gremlin Interactive would be bought out by Infogrames, and Infogrames would sell DMA Design to Take-Two, enabling a close collaboration with Rockstar, who would publish Grand Theft Auto 2, which would go on to sell over 1 million copies. DMA Design would release Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001 and rebrand as Rockstar North from 2002. The Grand Theft Auto series would become one of the biggest franchises in video game history, having sold over 460 million units. We said that Psygnosis originally began as a developer, with Ian Hetherington and David Lawson performing much of the in-house duties, but it wouldn't be long before they shifted to publishing, taking on some of the UK's finest development talents, including Traveller's Tales, Bizarre Creations, DMA Design, Reflections, and many smaller boutique development shops. But internally, Psygnosis never stopped developing. In 1993, they would release Bram Stoker's Dracula on just about every platform at the time, including the Sega CD in November of that year. The game was published by Sony ImageSoft, but Psygnosis handled the majority of the development, with Traveller's Tales assisting. It would also see ports to the Amiga and MS-DOS. The game is based on the 1992 film of the same name. The Super NES and Genesis games were platforming action titles that were mostly the same as each other, but there were some differences. The Sega CD version is perhaps the most interesting of the lot, taking advantage of the full motion video for intro sequences, cutscenes, and even streaming in level data on the fly as the main protagonist Jonathan Harker takes out birds and bats that stand in your way. The Amiga version is something else altogether. It uses the same Jonathan Harker digitized sprite as the Sega CD version, but it's more of a platforming action-adventure game with 9 stages. But make no mistake, no matter the version, Bram Stoker's Dracula is not good. The gameplay makes Shadow of the Beast feel like Super Mario World, and reviewers of the game criticized it accordingly. Psygnosis would continue their push into CD technology. The Misadventures of Flink is a stunning 1994 2D platformer that was developed by ex-Thalion developers and saw releases on the Sega CD, Amiga CD32, and later a cut-down version on the Genesis. The Sega CD version has full CD audio at introduction FMV and extra levels, and the CD32 version, while not as good, is still a standout for that platform. The game was programmed by Erwin Klobhofer, who was an extremely talented and skilled Amiga developer. Henk Nyborg's pixel artistry is absolutely jaw-dropping, and it's on full display here with vibrant, detailed backgrounds, fluid animations, and some of the very best hand-drawn 2D pixel artistry that you'll ever see. Flink is a cult classic. While it's not considered the best platform game ever, it's definitely one of the best titles on the Amiga CD32, and it looks stunning. The follow-up to Microcosm, known as Novastorm, would come from an initial concept known as Scavenger 4, which would be the title of the game in Japan. Rather than use third-party video codecs to render their FMVs, they used their own in-house custom compression routines that they had developed for years. According to Richard Brown, serving as chief designer of the Advanced Technology Group, Trip Hawkins was astounded by the quality of the 3DO video when I demoed it to him at CES in 1993. Initially developed for the FM Towns Marty, Novastorm the game isn't too different from Microcosm in its execution. It's an on-rail shooter over FMV. It looks great, sounds even better, and it has a ton of action, pickups, enemies, and bosses. As far as the gameplay is concerned, it's limited, but technically, it absolutely wipes the floor off Star Wars Rebel Assault in terms of the graphics and fluidity. The custom decompression video routines were in full display here. During this era of high-quality FMV sequences in games, there was only so far that this technology could be taken, and thanks to Wolfenstein and Doom, 3D games had started to become very popular, and Psygnosis were exploring 3D both internally via the Advanced Technology Group and externally, looking for outside developers they could partner with to bring 3D games to their label. One such title was 1994's Ecstatica, an early survival horror title developed by Andrew Spencer, perhaps best known for international soccer on the Commodore 64. Ecstatica targeted MS-DOS and 486 PCs. The custom engine featured 3D garage-shaded ellipses over pre-rendered backgrounds. And despite the game's colourful and bright visuals, the story depicts huge amounts of violence and horror. In the game, the main protagonist learns that almost all of the town's population was slaughtered by demonic creatures. Trying to escape the town causes only the bridge to collapse, but the protagonist has no choice but to face the evil that haunts the town. The engine was originally developed for the Commodore Amiga, but moved to the IBM PC to meet the demands of real-time rendering ellipsoids. The custom engine also implements Z-buffering and can render 3D flat-shaded polygons. There is no texture mapping at all in the game, but clever use of color shading adds detail and depth to the visuals. This was an early look at how 3D technology would rapidly evolve. Internally, Psygnosis were working closely with their new parent Sony on the PlayStation hardware. Sony would be the underdog, entering the market competing with the likes of Nintendo and Sega, established giants with multi-million-dollar franchises such as Mario, Sonic, Zelda, and Virtua Fighter. There was no guarantee of success. The hardware was solid, but the PlayStation needed to make a statement. Establishing a brand, an identity, would be key. It had no legacy, no franchises, but it did have Psygnosis. The first order of business was to put development kits in front of developers, but traditional development hardware is expensive and hard to get a hold of. However, the PsyQ development hardware was already being used by the top talent in Europe for the 16-bit market. Psygnosis would update PsyQ to use for the 32-bit PlayStation. This was a clever move. Developers already familiar with PsyQ would have a much easier time migrating to the PlayStation. Ken Kittaragi approved PsyQ and it became the official SDK for the Sony PlayStation. All that was needed to do now was to build games in 3D. This would happen in late 1993. Sony, assisted closely by Psygnosis, would put on their very first developer conference. There, they would show off the jaw-dropping Demo 1, the famous real-time rendered 3D dinosaur, fully texture-mapped, animated, with real-time lighting. The crowd, mostly seasoned developers, were left stunned. The PlayStation had arrived. The console would mark a cultural shift in gaming. The thinking was, those teenagers who played the Sega Genesis and Super NES were now 20-somethings with disposable income, and the PlayStation should be targeting games their age range rather than targeting for kids. In the US, Sony marketed the PlayStation to the extreme sports crowd, and in the UK, it would be nightclubs and the underground rave scene. Psygnosis would develop and release Wipeout in 1995, a launch title for the hardware in Europe. Wipeout is a futuristic anti-grav racing game with incredible texture-mapped 3D visuals, a generational leap over anything ever seen before. There was simply nothing else like it. Set in 2052, the player competes in an anti-gravity racing league featuring cutting-edge 3D polygonal graphics that looked fantastic, while everything ran at an excellent frame rate. It features various races, weapons, power-ups, and tracks to choose from. It's a very fun game and a brilliant launch title for the PlayStation. It featured music by the Chemical Brothers, Left Field, and Orbital. In-house musician Tim Wright, aka Cold Storage, added background beats that was simply the icing on the cake. The fusion of dance music and video games certainly had been seen before. Yuzo Koshiro did incredible work on Streets of Rage, and the Amiga demo scene often featured incredible dance music. But this was different. By bringing in known electronic music artists to the PlayStation, Psygnosis were able to platform British dance culture and Wipeout to a global audience. Additionally, they brought in Designer Republic, a studio which developed icons and artwork and branding for the game. Sony had successfully managed to entice 20-somethings to purchase PlayStations, and at the same time made it so video games were no longer for kids. The original Wipeout was a very good game, but it wasn't perfect. In particular, the control scheme was left a little lacking. However, the follow-up Wipeout XL or 2097 is considered the peak of the series. Once again, internally developed by Psygnosis, it featured improvements in all aspects: controls, graphics, gameplay, and sound. It has all new tracks, new racing leagues, a weapon system to allow players to eliminate opponents, shields that can be recharged, and much improved ship handling over the original. The licensed electronic soundtrack of the first was also expanded and brought in new bands such as The Prodigy and Underworld. The music in Wipeout 2097 remains one of the key pillars of the game. Once again, the game would be promoted in dance clubs in the UK. A separate audio CD with the game's music was also available, so players could listen to the soundtrack separately when they weren't playing the game. Wipeout 2097 is a work of art. It made everything about the first game even better. It's one of the greatest sequels to any game of all time, and showed the rapid development of 3D technology and the PlayStation in just 18 months.
Electrical. Electrical.
Reflections, one of the earliest development partners for Psygnosis, moved on from the Amiga and started developing games for the PlayStation. They were provided early access to PsyQ dev kits, and the result would be Destruction Derby, a vehicular combat racing video game that tasked the player with racing and destroying cars to score points. There are 12 individual courses to race with no mirror image tracks. This would be quite common on the Nintendo 64 to cut down on storage limits. The smash 'em up option is the same as the default racing option, but you can also score points for totaling other cars. But the real draw of the game is the Destruction Derby mode, where you face off against 19 other cars in one oval arena. The last car standing wins. At the time, the fact that there were up to 20 texture map cars to appear on screen with real-world physics and no sacrifice in graphics or performance was an incredible feat. Reflections had done it again. No game was able to do this outside of AM2's Sega Saturn conversion of Daytona USA. But the magic to the optimization of the game is what you really don't notice. While the game's graphics is 3D, the action itself takes place in a 2D world. That is, there are no slopes, hills or valleys. There are no mid-air collisions. Everything takes place on the ground level. The physics are not real world, striking a balance between realism and arcade fun, and all the cars are exactly the same shape with only some variables in the texture mapping. And according to Martin Edmondson, the game simulates its physics to be as close as possible to real without making it unplayable, and the game would be developed in just 7 months. 1996's Destruction Derby 2 is a continuation of the original game. It featured ideas that did not make it into the first game, including tracks that had obstacles and improved realism and physics. The car mechanics were also redesigned. The cars would be redesigned to resemble stock cars used in NASCAR racing, and according to Martin Edmondson, he wanted to Americanize the game. With additional variety and realism, new stages that featured forests, cities and canyons, complete with obstacles, were all added to the game. Car dynamics and physics were also rewritten. In fact, the entire engine had an overhaul to incorporate all these new routines. Cars could now be flipped over, and in many ways, although it was familiar, Destruction Derby 2 felt like a brand new game. Both the original Destruction Derby and its sequel Destruction Derby 2 would end up selling over 1 million units apiece. Reflections would go on to develop Thunder Truck Rally in 1998, with Psygnosis as the publisher once again. This game started its development during the life cycle of Destruction Derby 1's development, and it's a game based on those famous car-crushing monster truck pickups with oversized wheels. Overall, it's not a bad game if you're a fan of off-road racing, but it's not particularly good either, and this would be Reflection's last ever game for Psygnosis. In 1999, they were acquired by GT Interactive and find success with the Driver franchise. In 2006, parent company Atari announced that it had transferred all the staff and most of the assets of Reflections, including the IP and technology of the Driver series, to Ubisoft for $24 million, to which Reflections is still a part of to this very day. 3D Lemmings was another launch title for the PlayStation in Europe, and it's a bit of a weird one. This was the first game without DMA Design, who had moved on from Psygnosis at this point, and as the name implies, this is a new Lemmings game, but in 3D. Thanks to the power of the PlayStation, it was now possible. This one was developed by Studio Clockwork Games and released in the summer of 1995, with once again the goal to guide the green-haired blue-shirted creatures to safety by assigning various roles to other lemmings to guide them along the designated path. Lemmings was brilliant as a 2D game, but as a 3D title, it gets lost in translation. Many games tried to switch to 3D at this point and didn't fare so well. On the PlayStation, the control scheme is clunky. Psygnosis would release a PC port of the game that does control much better. If you must play 3D Lemmings, then check out the PC port. Sony struggled to get traction with the Lemmings franchise. In short, they didn't really know what to do with it, but there were some interesting moments. The Lemmings spin-off The Adventures of Lomax in 1996 was a pivot from the puzzle game to side-scrolling platforming. The game is based around a single lemming known as Lomax, the lone survivor of an evil spell, and it was once again developed by the duo that developed Flink in 1993, Erwin Klobhofer and Henk Nyborg. This was a wonderfully created 2D platformer and used the Lemmings IP for instant recognition.
We are now the biggest development house in Europe, achieving a 25% share of the PlayStation market in 1995.
By 1997, Psygnosis had expanded significantly, but the DNA of the company hadn't changed much. Yes, they were owned by Sony, who by now had massive success on their hands with the PlayStation. But the thing is, Psygnosis had quite a bit of freedom to carry on doing business how they wanted. In an interview with IGN in 1997, Ian Hetherington would say, "We have a virtually unlimited acquisition portfolio. We can do basically whatever we like. But we're interested in real talent. The problem is that if it's mature, it's too expensive and it's in the marketplace already. So we generally don't go and talk to the headline companies. Instead, we sponsor people through university. We set them up in offices. We give them the equipment and we put them in a position where they can produce state-of-the-art product. It's this philosophy that comes from the top down. You don't suddenly go up the company hierarchy and meet the suits. We are a studio based around technology." Psygnosis had set up no less than 9 satellite offices, most in Europe, but 1 in the US. The Stroud studio would release G-Police in 1997, a futuristic combat flight simulation video game set in a Blade Runner style universe. In the game, you played through various missions with your VTOL jet, locating and eliminating hostiles or protecting a convoy of friendlies, scanning for illegal cargo, and much more. All on 2 discs, packed full of full-motion videos to keep the story moving along. On the PlayStation, G-Police is often criticized for its low draw distance, which can be adjusted. However, the problem is that increasing the draw distance hurts performance. Psygnosis had just started their push into Windows gaming. Hetherington would state in 1997, "The PC market has only just started. The combination of 3 technologies, processor speed, 3D acceleration, and Windows 95, has finally provided a viable gaming platform. Any 2 of them don't, so up to about 6 months ago, we didn't see the PC as a gaming platform. What we're seeing now is a nearly meteoric rise in the development for the PC. The shift is happening in the studios, and it's showing more and more. Our number of PC products is going to dramatically rise in the future." G-Police would be ported to the PC, and the game made use of cutting-edge technologies such as force feedback joysticks, 3D sound, and direct 3D hardware acceleration. GameSpot would go on to say, "G-Police is quite possibly the best-looking game to hit the scene since the advent of 3D accelerator cards." Back in the 90s, epic space combat games were mostly PC exclusive. Classics like Wing Commander, Star Wars X-Wing, and TIE Fighter ruled the genre. But Colony Wars proved that the PlayStation could more than hold its own. In the right hands, it could even surpass the competition. Psygnosis, at this point, had mastered the PlayStation. Colony Wars is an epic 2-disc masterpiece, a space opera of the highest caliber, right up there with the very best of Wing Commander, and for the time, hands down, it was the greatest space combat experience you could play on any console. The sense of scale and immersion is absolutely breathtaking, even today. There are a total of 70 different missions in the game, with lots of variety between them. Just like in Wing Commander, failing a mission does not necessarily mean a game over screen. In some scenarios, it can lead you down a different story path, which has an effect on the overall story and the particular endings in the game that you will receive. The graphics and sense of scale in the game are incredible, and the compelling mission variety keeps you on your toes. An absolute belter of a game, with signature Psygnosis FMV sequences to keep the story moving along quite nicely. Colony Wars reviewed exceptionally well with a 91 on Metacritic. It also sold about 150,000 copies in the US, and it garnered 2 sequels, Colony Wars Vengeance in 1998 and Red Sun in 2000. And 1997 would continue on with Formula 1. This was developed by Bizarre Creations, who were working with Psygnosis under different names over the years. Bizarre Creations, of course, would go on to make Metropolis Street Racer, Geometry Wars, and the Project Gotham games. The original iteration of Formula 1 is very good. As an early F1 game, only Jeff Crammond's Formula 1 GP could compare. Psygnosis' game captures the true essence of what made Formula 1 racing so good in the 90s. It looks great, runs at the right sense of speed, and the game can be customized to be as easy or as difficult as you like. The tracks in Formula One are realistically modeled from original track data, and Bizarre Creations would create their own 3D engine for the game, rather than using technology from Wipeout or Destruction Derby. They would implement a custom level of detail system to switch between high-res and low-res models at certain draw distances. As a side note, Formula One was one of the earliest games I bought for my PC that supported a 3D effects accelerator card, and at the time, this was state of the art. It looked and ran superb on my PC, and the Formula One series would become an extremely important one for Psygnosis. Psygnosis never shied away from taking risks, and they're willing to experiment. The Sentient in 1997 was an ambitious first-person adventure game that simulates a living space station. The story is that the space station is heading towards the killer sun, where the AI-driven crew members react to your control in real time. The dialogue in the game was text-based, with players piecing together natural-sounding questions from menus to unravel murders, assassinations, and mysteries with up to 12 different endings. The game itself controls like a dog, but it does have its fans, and once it connects with you, it leaves its mark. During this era of Wipeout, Colony Wars, G-Police, and Formula One, Psygnosis represented some of the very best developers in the 32-bit generation, just like they were back in the days of the Commodore Amiga. This wasn't a fluke. Most software developers did not transition well to 32-bit, with many of them going out of business or fizzling out. Psygnosis' PlayStation era was even bigger than the Amiga. They were now a household name across the world. But behind closed doors, friction between Sony and Psygnosis was building. In 1996, Sony was looking to sell Psygnosis off and brought in investment bankers to broker the sale. According to some reports, Sony was growing frustrated by Psygnosis' games everywhere developer-first approach, spurred on by press release announcements confirming their multi-format strategy for games publishing, announcing that their biggest titles, Wipeout, Destruction Derby, 3D Lemmings, and Discworld, would all be coming to the Sega Saturn. Sony could do nothing but sit and watch. It was rumored that the initial contract contained a loophole to enable the company to develop for any hardware platform they liked. Just 6 months later, the sale was rescinded as relations improved, albeit temporarily. Their games were still being developed for the PlayStation front and center, but they often worked on other platforms. Manx TT, a Sega motorbike arcade game, was ported to Windows, and Psygnosis were the developer. In 1998, Psygnosis announced that they would be bringing games to the Nintendo 64, with their first being Wipeout 64 releasing that year, a move that angered Sony executives. At their largest, Psygnosis had around 400 employees and 9 offices around the world, and they were looking to expand further. But Sony leadership deemed Psygnosis' rapid global expansion and massive development spending as too large for the business to sustain. Ian Hetherington would step away from his managing director position at Psygnosis and leave Sony in 1998. Some suggest he was voted out by the board. Other reports suggest he left on his own terms. But either way, it didn't matter. With Hetherington gone, Sony would begin a massive reorganization to consolidate its European operations and began to strip Psygnosis of its independent status, eventually leading to mass layoffs in 1998. While ongoing internal restructuring was occurring, Psygnosis was still releasing games. 1999's RollCage is a futuristic racing game developed by Attention to Detail. The game's selling point was the unique physics engine, in which cars could drive up on walls and ceilings due to the airflow passing between them at extreme speeds. In some ways, RollCage shares similarities with Wipeout with its track layouts, weapons and power-ups, but it also has its own identity. It's a fun racing game, and it looks superb for its time on the PlayStation 1 and even better on an accelerated PC. Wipeout 3 also would release in 1999, and once again, to excellent reviews, perhaps not hitting the same highs as Wipeout 2097 or XL, with the main reason being it was not too different from its predecessor. According to reports, however, Sony gave the Wipeout team a small budget and a tight schedule of only 9 months to release the game before the PlayStation 2 arrived. Because of the time constraints, the team was not looking to change too much of the classic formula, instead focusing on the technical aspects. The game was boosted to run at a resolution of 512 by 256 pixels, a higher resolution than the typical 256 by 240. The game's renderer was also rewritten and optimized to reduce clipping, and in addition, a local 2-player split screen was added, which was groundbreaking given the increase in the resolution. The result is Wipeout 3 is another incredible addition to the Wipeout series, and a great way to cap off Wipeout's domination on the PlayStation 1. In 2000, Sony would rebrand Psygnosis' marketing core to Sony Computer Entertainment Europe, and the development arm would rebrand as SCE Studio Liverpool. The famous owl logo was officially retired. With Hetherington gone, Sony had direct control of the studio and cut the majority of IP from the books, focusing on just two key franchises, Formula 1 and Wipeout. Both franchises remained moderately successful. The Formula 1 series moved to an annual release cycle, and Wipeout would see iterations of its games on the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Portable, and the PlayStation Vita. But due to increasing cost of game development and tapering off sales, Sony would shut down Studio Liverpool in 2010, closing the books on Psygnosis forever, a true end of an era. Through the early days of Imagine Software to the Amiga, during the corporate days of Sony, Hetherington's approach to game development never changed. Back the talent, not the product. The philosophy was always to make the best product you can. Now if that meant drafting in an artist, a coder, playtesters, whatever it took, and giving the developers more time, letting them set their ambition, letting them fail, whatever it took to make that supreme product, we were prepared to do it. This wasn't just marketing talk. Psygnosis incubated studios such as Traveler's Tales, DMA Design, Bizarre Creations, Creative Assembly, Reflections. All these firms went on to make millions in sales, and all of them were on Psygnosis' books. These developers who cut their teeth went on to shape huge parts of the industry we know today, and at the heart of it all was co-founder Ian Hetherington, the visionary who believed in the dreamers, fought for their ideas, and turned a small Liverpool team into legend. Hetherington would pass away in December of 2021 after a short illness, and the tributes poured in across the industry. He was a true pioneer, a facilitator of creativity, and one of the founding fathers of the British video game industry. While he's sadly missed, his legacy lives on. Psygnosis was more than a company. It was a moment of time where gaming felt limitless, where visionaries could make the impossible happen, and the whole world would pay attention. Bye for now.